What if human intelligence isn't unique at all, and creatures without brains have already learned how to think? Human beings are obsessed with intelligence. We admire it more than strength, speed, or even beauty. Entire civilizations are built around the idea that being smart is what makes us special. We test children for it, we rank people by it. We quietly divide the world into the intelligent and the unintelligent as if the line between them were obvious. But the more time I spent reading about biology, evolution, and animal behavior, the more I started feeling deeply uncomfortable with one simple question: what if we don't actually understand intelligence at all? Not really, because the moment you try to define it clearly, everything begins to fall apart. Is intelligence logic, memory, creativity, self-awareness, problem-solving, planning, language? If intelligence is so important to us, why is it so difficult to explain where it truly begins? And maybe even stranger, why do some creatures with tiny brains, or no brain at all, sometimes behave in ways that feel disturbingly intelligent? That question genuinely stayed in my head for days the first time I encountered it. Because from an evolutionary perspective, intelligence may not have emerged to write symphonies or solve calculus. It may have started for a far simpler reason: survival. Life exists inside an endless war against reality itself. Every organism is trying to solve the same brutal problems: find food, avoid danger, adapt before the environment changes, survive long enough to reproduce. And suddenly intelligence starts looking less like some magical human trait and more like a survival toolkit. A flexible set of abilities that helps life navigate uncertainty. And once I started seeing intelligence that way, something strange happened. The natural world stopped looking mechanical. It started looking alive in an entirely different sense. Slime molds began solving mazes. Bees started optimizing solutions. Animals I once dismissed as simple suddenly seemed to possess fragments of something eerily familiar. Maybe intelligence is not a ladder with humans standing at the top. Maybe it is something far older, far stranger, and far more widespread than we ever imagined, and honestly, I think that changes the way we see ourselves forever. And the deeper I followed that question, the more I realized that intelligence may begin with something astonishingly simple: information. Every living thing, no matter how primitive, exists trapped inside uncertainty. Somewhere nearby there may be food, danger, shelter, poison, or a predator waiting in the dark. To survive, life must constantly collect signals from the world and transform them into meaningful action. Eyes track movement, ears detect vibrations, chemical receptors sense nutrients or toxins. Even our own bodies are quietly monitoring internal conditions every second: hunger, exhaustion, pain, temperature, fear. Without information, an organism is helpless. It cannot adapt because it cannot even understand what is happening to it. But information alone is useless if it disappears instantly. And this is where evolution introduced one of the most powerful tools ever created: memory. Memory allows life to carry the past into the future. It prevents organisms from having to start over every moment of their existence. A place associated with danger can be avoided. A successful hunting route can be repeated. A useful behavior can slowly become refined through experience. That refinement is what we call learning. And honestly, the more I think about learning, the stranger it feels. Because learning is not simply storing information, it is behavior changing itself over time. Life studying reality, and rewriting its own actions in response. What completely changed my perspective was discovering that even organisms without brains can display something eerily close to this process. Slime molds are basically giant single cells, no neurons, no thoughts, no consciousness as we understand it. Yet when scientists placed slime molds inside mazes with food waiting at the end, the organisms began exploring different pathways, while leaving behind chemical slime trails marking where they had already been. Over time, they avoided inefficient routes and concentrated on successful ones. The slime mold was effectively externalizing memory into the environment itself. And I remember staring at that experiment thinking, if something without a brain can gather information, remember patterns, and improve behavior, then maybe intelligence is not a single invention that suddenly appeared in humans. Maybe life has been slowly learning how to think for hundreds of millions of years. And once you accept that intelligence can emerge from surprisingly simple systems, the behavior of more complex animals starts feeling almost impossible to ignore. What fascinates me most is the moment intelligence stops looking like repetition and starts looking like flexibility. Not instinct, not automatic behavior, but the ability to improvise when reality changes unexpectedly. Raccoons are one of my favorite examples of this because they behave less like wild animals and more like tiny masked engineers. They thrive in human environments filled with barriers specifically designed to keep things out. Locks, latches, containers, windows, garbage bins. Yet raccoons repeatedly find ways around them, with an almost unsettling persistence. In one study, researchers gave raccoons boxes secured with different locking systems. Some required pulling bolts, others needed pushing bars or removing plugs in a certain sequence. What amazed me was not just how quickly the raccoons learned the solutions, but how calmly they adapted when the puzzles became more complicated. They weren't blindly repeating movements, they were understanding relationships between actions and outcomes. Even more surprising, many of them still remembered the solutions nearly a year later. That detail stayed with me because memory by itself is impressive, but intelligence becomes something entirely different when creativity enters the picture. One experiment demonstrated this beautifully. Researchers showed raccoons that dropping stones into a water container would raise the water level enough to reach a floating marshmallow reward. Most followed the expected solution, but one raccoon ignored the stones completely and simply tipped the entire container over. I honestly love that moment because it feels so strangely familiar. It is the kind of shortcut a human child might invent. And maybe that is what creativity really is. The ability to escape rigid patterns and generate entirely new paths toward a goal. You see this across nature. Primates shape sticks into tools for extracting insects. See otters crack shells using rocks. Some octopuses collect coconut shells and carry them across the ocean floor, assembling them into portable shelters when danger appears. That image alone is extraordinary to me. An animal preparing protection before the threat even arrives. At some point, intelligence stops reacting to the world, it begins reshaping the world itself. And the moment a living creature begins preparing for a future that does not exist yet, intelligence enters an entirely new dimension. Playing may be one of the most extraordinary abilities evolution ever produced because it requires escaping the present moment mentally. An organism must hold a future possibility inside its mind, compare different actions, calculate outcomes, and adjust behavior before consequences even happen. In a way, planning is reality simulation. And strangely enough, some of the best examples of this don't come from massive predators or highly social primates, they come from squirrels. At first glance, squirrels seem chaotic. They dart across trees, bury food randomly, and constantly appear distracted. But beneath that frantic behavior is a surprisingly sophisticated survival strategy built around memory, evaluation, and deception. Squirrels do not treat every nut equally, they inspect them carefully, weighing factors like quality, ripeness, and long-term value. Lower quality food is often eaten immediately, while better nuts are stored for winter. Even the effort required to bury and protect each nut appears to influence their decisions. What really fascinated me, though, was discovering that squirrels sometimes fake their own behavior. When they realize another animal is watching, they may pretend to bury food in one location while secretly hiding it somewhere else later. They create false caches to manipulate potential thieves. And honestly, the first time I learned this, I had to stop and think about what that behavior truly implies. Because deception requires more than instinct. To trick another creature successfully, an animal must recognize that someone else possesses their own perspective, desires, and intentions separate from its own. The squirrel is not simply hiding food anymore, it is anticipating another mind. That realization completely changed how I viewed animal intelligence. But what I find even more beautiful is that nature never evolved one universal form of intelligence. Different environments shape different mental toolkits. Sheep, for example, evolved around social survival rather than strategic deception. They can recognize and remember individual faces for years, because social recognition matters more to their survival than complex planning. And maybe that is the mistake humans keep making. We rank intelligence by how human it looks. But evolution never tried to create copies of us. It created countless different ways of solving reality. And somewhere along this immense evolutionary journey, humans developed a form of intelligence powerful enough to completely transform the planet itself. What makes humans unusual is not just memory, creativity, planning, or tool use. Other animals possess fragments of those abilities too. The real turning point was something layered on top of intelligence: culture. At some stage, humans stopped relying only on what a single individual could personally learn within one lifetime. We began transferring knowledge across generations. One human discovered fire. Another improved tools. Another developed agriculture. Another invented mathematics. Over thousands of years, information stopped dying with the individual and started accumulating like a growing external brain shared by the species itself. And honestly, I think that changes the meaning of intelligence entirely, because no single human being truly understands modern civilization. No one person could independently build a smartphone, launch a satellite, or create a particle accelerator from scratch. Yet together, through cooperation and inherited knowledge, we can accomplish things so complex they almost feel impossible. In a strange way, humanity itself behaves like one enormous distributed intelligence system. But the deeper I think about this, the more unsettling it becomes, because the same intelligence that cured diseases also created nuclear weapons. The same creativity that built industrial civilization also destabilized ecosystems and accelerated climate change. The same scientific progress that extended human life also produced problems evolving faster than our instincts can handle. And maybe that is the real crisis of modern intelligence. For most of evolutionary history, intelligence was optimized for immediate survival. Find food, escape danger, protect your tribe. Think short-term, because the future was uncertain and survival was fragile. But now humanity faces problems unfolding across decades and centuries. Environmental collapse, antibiotic resistance, artificial intelligence. Global systems so interconnected that one mistake can ripple across the entire planet. Our ancient survival instincts are struggling inside a world our own intelligence created. And maybe the next stage of intelligence is not becoming smarter. Maybe it is becoming wiser, because in the end, intelligence is not simply the ability to dominate nature or solve technical problems. It is the ability to understand consequences far enough into the future to protect what comes after us. We already possess the toolbox. The question is whether we will learn to use it before our own intelligence outruns our wisdom. Maybe the most humbling lesson about intelligence is that it was never meant to make us feel superior. It evolved to help life adapt, cooperate, and survive uncertainty. And perhaps true intelligence today is not measured by IQ, status, or knowledge alone, but by our ability to stay curious, think long-term, learn continuously, and make wiser decisions in a rapidly changing world. The future may belong not to the strongest or smartest individuals, but to those willing to understand deeply before reacting blindly. So before you leave, what animal intelligence surprised you the most in this video? Please share your thoughts in the comments so everyone can explore different perspectives together. And if you enjoy these kinds of deep science explorations, Subscribe to the channel to support future videos and continue discovering the hidden complexity of life with us.